So welcome to Navigating Grief. We are Platform Wellbeing. We're part of the Platform family, and we are the training and therapeutic side of Platform. So today I am joined by Katie Pledge, Jody, Skene and Tracey Booth, who are all part of our counselling and talking therapies team. And today, let me just get my information so I can read it correctly. So we're joined by all three ladies who are lead counsellors for Platform Wellbeing, and they will be discussing navigating grief, supporting yourself and others. Now, we're going to talk about the important milestones like anniversaries, as well as experiences such as anticipatory grief, which includes the feeling of mourning and loss before a significant event, such as the death of a loved one. Additionally, there will be focused conversations on coping with grief and sudden loss. They'll be looking at ways that organisations, as well as individuals, can support employees who have experienced bereavement. Tracey Booth will be sharing her lived experiences, including the unique challenges faced when your grief isn't well understood. She will offer an insight into the diverse emotions people can experience, like guilt and the what-ifs, and provide practical coping techniques to navigate through grief challenges. Now, I just wanted to say, I know it's going to be reiterated, it's probably in the chat already. This is quite a sensitive topic. We understand that there may be some triggers in this, so please keep yourself safe. If it's too much, please just walk away, turn us off, pop your screen off. Just really make sure that you're in a safe place for this morning. So as I said, I've skipped the slides and done them in a bit of a wrong order, so I do apologise, Rachel. But as I said, we are made up of 4 parts of the business. We are workplace wellbeing, which is looking at the employment, employer arena, talking therapies, which goes into the employer arena as well, but that's more about looking at the individual and looking at what the individual needs and looking at different therapeutic experiences they can go through. Education and wellbeing, and that's looking after the professional as well as the person that's actually in the education arena. And then finally, we've got the supervision, which is becoming increasingly popular at the moment. And we can do that more as a group orientated session where people then can have their shared experiences and know that they're not alone when they're experiencing some of these. I think I've covered everything. If I haven't, then you get me back at the end where I can mop up all the stuff that I haven't said. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Jody and Katie, who have the first section of navigating grief. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And if you ladies can, great. If not, then I can pop it back up.
Yep. Mary. Yeah, I'm going to just be firstly reiterating a little bit of what you've already said, just going over a bit of what we're going to be covering and things like that. So when Katie has popped the
2 seconds. Right.
Lovely.
Sorry, I just skipped through what just now. Right, you ready, Jody?
Yeah, so Platform Wellbeing is currently running a bereavement project that offers 6 sessions of counselling, and then after that we have an optional monthly group meeting, and we'll give a bit more detail about that towards the end. It was suggested a little while back that myself and Katie put this together to act as like a brief introduction to bereavement counselling, but also as a resource for those who are experiencing grief or people who are supporting those people, whether that be in a personal capacity or a professional capacity. So firstly, we'll be covering a little bit about what grief is, different types of grief, a little bit around bereavement by suicide, a couple of the many models of grief, how you as an employer can support an employee who is experiencing a bereavement. And then we'll be talking to our lead counsellor, Tracey, who will be kindly talking to us about her own experience of disenfranchised grief. We've got lots to cover, and each of these topics could have their own webinar or day training on them. So we're having to be really concise about what we're talking about. But if any of this resonates with you, we are having a questions and answers section at the end. So please pop any questions that you have in the chat box. And just to remind you that it is being recorded, and we're also happy for anyone to contact us at the end or after the webinar. And please take care of yourself. We're discussing some really weighty topics, so if you need to take a break, mute us, or even leave. We're not going to be offended if you need to leave the session. It's been recorded. You can refer back to it at any point.
Oh, thank you, Jody. So starting off, what is grief? So grief is the experience of coping with a loss. Most of us think that grief is the painful period following the death of a loved one, but it can also accompany any event that disrupts or changes our sense of routine or reliability. This could include not only the loss of a loved one, but also the loss of a job, a pet, a home. And there's no right or wrong way to feel with grief, and there's also no time limit at all. Grief can create a lot of different and confusing emotions, which can be experienced all at once or through quick changes. And it can be both universal, and a personal experience. We also discuss a bit later the importance of not comparing grief and feelings with others, as individual experiences can hugely vary.
So Katie gave a few examples there of what you can grieve the loss of. So we've got firstly a loved one or a friend or a family member or partner, and this is what people commonly think of when you think of grief or bereavement. But grief is related to any loss, and that can be losing a pet. Pets can provide companionship and emotional support, and to some people it can be like losing a family member. Not everyone understands or feels the same way about losing pets, which may make you feel embarrassed or reluctant to talk about your grief, but all types of grief are valid. You can grieve a marriage, a friendship, or a companionship, your home or community with having to move, your job, career, work colleagues. We work with a lot of people who have hit retirement and are really struggling with the loss of that part of their lives. Financial stability as well is a big one. But you can also grieve a dream, a goal, your health, if you lose your good health, your youth, or your fertility.
Feelings around grief. So this slide just shows some of the feelings and emotions related to grief. Some may seem more relatable than others, such as numbness, sadness, shock and pain. But as we mentioned, feelings can, vary from person to person. It may depend on the type of relationship that you had with a person, or how close you were, or how they died, or how you feel afterwards. Your previous experiences of loss of grief can also affect how you feel. You may feel angry, at the person or the situation. You can feel relief that that person is out of pain, or relief from the pressure of care. And also fear. You could have that fear of, the reality of loss, that it is out of your control. And as we mentioned, it is important to remember that grief is not the same for everyone. Everyone's experience and feeling towards it is different, even if it looks similar on the outside. So also, as well as the feelings of grief, there are, numerous ways of saying, how somebody has died, and people use different wording, based on who they're talking to. You could say they've died or passed away as an example. If you like, you can use the chat box to add some of your own, but here are some that we've come across, such as lost, passed away, deceased, slipped away, died, they're no longer with us. Gone to sleep. Even though there are different language that can be used, and some language may be a bit more comforting than others. It is important to have that awareness of what language you are using, as it may portray a different reality in some cases. Sometimes if you're saying that people have lost their battle, that may portray a weakness, or gone to a better place, may come across insensitive. But at that time of grief, you may not, how you describe it. Again, it's how you feel about that situation, how you feel comfortable describing it.
So we'll talk a little bit about the types of grief. Oh, that's a good one, Sophia, on eternal holiday. Yeah. So the first one we'll talk about is complicated grief. And this is where, those painful emotions that you feel when you're grieving are so long lasting and severe that you have trouble recovering from the loss and resuming your own life. You almost become stuck in your grief. There's no identifiable cause of complicated grief. However, there is more of a risk in certain circumstances. So if you've lost somebody and it was a shock or completely unexpected, if you were unfortunate enough to witness the loss, people who experience more than one loss in a short period of time, people who are suffering with a history of mental conditions, and also not being present when their death occurs. It's not a diagnosed term. However, recently the prolonged grief disorder has been added to the DSM-5, and this comes under a trauma and stressor related disorder, and it's described as an intensity of grief and yearning for a loved one that lasts more than 6 months in adults or 12 months in children and teens. And I just wanted to let you know that we don't have, here at Platform, we don't have a time limit on when we will work with people. So we don't put timescales on grief. So if it's before that time and you feel that you wanted to speak to somebody, then we would chat to you. So indications that you might be experiencing complicated grief is that feeling that part of you has died, avoidance of reminders of that person that you lost, difficulty pursuing goals or planning any kind of future. If you're having those feelings of extreme loneliness, having problems remembering any positive memories of that person, and also things such as substance misuse, suicidal thoughts, emotional numbness, and sense of disbelief.
We come on to anticipatory grief, and this occurs before a loss, and it's a grief that you would expect to experience. This can happen if a loved one is given a terminal diagnosis, as an example, or if you have to undergo surgery, such as an amputation. It can also appear, if you have an impending divorce or having to move homes. And this can create questions at the time, such as, what can I do to help? Or how much time have you got left? Should I be there all the time? Or what will happen when you die? And this can be that confusion side before the loss. And a study of Swedish females who have lost a spouse, 40% of them found that the pre-loss stage was actually more stressful than the post-loss stage.
So we've got disenfranchised grief, which was coined by Dr. Kenneth J. Cotter in 1989. And this is where grief that isn't acknowledged, valued, or recognised on a societal level, or there's a lack of social understanding, or people feel that the way they are grieving is not considered to be socially acceptable. So we're going to ask you to use the chat box again and see if you can think of any examples in which this would apply. I'll give a few examples. We've got quite a few, but this tends to happen when a relationship is not recognised, when the loss is not acknowledged, or when the griever is excluded, or when the circumstance around that loss is taboo. So when we were talking about losing a pet, that might be an example of disenfranchised grief, where you're not feeling that you're understood. Yeah, everyone loses loved ones. not being close to the person you're grieving. That's a really good example, I think, is that when the relationship is not recognised. So when it's, oh, there's so much going on in the chat. Miscarriage is a really good example. Grieving your dream birth, yeah. Another one, father of my children's eyes recently. We were never in a proper relationship. Yeah, these are all really, really good examples of disenfranchised grief. Death of an ex-spouse is a really good one. People feel that, you know, they can't grieve people that they chose not to be with. An abortion, grieving an abortion, or placing a child up for adoption. When you lose your hair during chemotherapy, or if you're thought to be too young when children are grieving. Example of being a relationship that's overlooked due to culture, or if the circumstances taboo, if you lost somebody via suicide or AIDS or drug overdose or anorexia. And when you're not talking about your grief, it can feel really isolating, and you might choose not to share that. Thank you for all the examples.
This slide shows secondary loss, which is also referred to as secondary grief. It's not because of these losses less important or painful, but it's just there is a secondary result of the primary grief that you feel for your loved one. These can lead to unexpected changes or challenges, and like some of the things mentioned on here, it could be that loss of the purpose or routine, especially if you're caring for somebody. A loss of role or a change in role. It could also be that loss of identity and that confusion over who you are now without that person around. And also like the loss of future plans, not doing things that you imagine doing. These losses that you can experience, they are as a result of someone's death, and they can also catch you off guard as well and be unexpected.
So we're going to have a look at a few models of grief. We are very person-centered here and understand that everyone's experience of grief is individual, but sometimes these can help with the work that we do. So the first one we'll look at is the stages of grief, and I think a lot of people have heard of the stages of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross describes the 5 stages of grief in her book on death and dying. It was published in 1969, but it is still one of the most well-known resources for understanding the grieving process. It was originally related to the stages of having a terminal diagnosis. She was working with people who had terminal cancer, but while working with families, noticed it related to those grieving a loss as well as the before the loss, before the bereavement. So you have denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. These stages don't always appear in the same order for everyone, and some people experience some stages and not others. It's common to move forwards, backwards through these stages in your own way and at your own pace. Some people may experience grief outside the cycle altogether. So grief, again, affects us all in different ways. So it's important to remember that there's no normal way. There's not going to be working your way through these stages and then feel all right.
We also have Tonkin's grief model, which is one of my favourite models, and I use it quite a lot with clients. Tonkin discovered that people thought that as time went on, grief would shrink and become a much smaller part of life. So as you can see in the diagram, grief is represented by the ball and life is represented by the jar. But what happens is quite different. So the grief stays just as big, but your life grows around it. So there may be times where the grief feels just as intense as when it first happened, but there are other times when it feels that you can live in that space outside it. This view of grief, it doesn't tell somebody that the grief will go away in time and you'll never be over it, but it does acknowledge that there are some times when the grief will be and feel stronger than it does at other days. But there'll also be days where you feel that you're able to move on with parts of your life, which sometimes people feel guilty about this, as if it's disloyal to the person who has died. So the Growing Around Grief model shows that you can still grieve the loss of a loved one while carrying on with your own lives, and it shows that we can grow a new life that still always includes that grief.
So we have the Whirlpool model. I've only learnt this over the last year or so, and I really like it. I'm quite visual, so I do use this sometimes with clients who are a bit like me. So it looks quite complicated. It's by Dr. Richard Bolson, but it really isn't. So our life is represented by a boat that is moving through the river, moving through the everyday, which is the river of life, which is at the top. When we experience a loss, we're plunged down the waterfall of bereavement, falling into the whirlpool of grief, which is a mixture of emotions and confusions. So immediately afterwards, we might find ourselves washed up onto the banks of the river, feeling stuck and unable to move, or being thrown onto the rocks, and that represents the pain that you feel of the loss, and that can hit at unexpected times. So it's that feeling of being thrown around. Eventually, hopefully, moving into the lower part of the river and into a new stream that shows the path towards the reality of loss and moving towards accepting.
And we also have the dual process model as well. So this model focuses on the stressors that are linked to grief. And there are two types of stressors, the loss orientated and the restoration orientated. So the restoration orientated focuses on the demands of living after the loss. These can be like a distraction from grief, and also, you know, everyday routines such as cooking, childcare, household chores, things like that. And then the loss orientated focuses on emotionally processing the loss of the person who has died. So this may involve crying, yearning, reminiscing, going through memories. The moving back and forth between these stressors are a key part of the dual process model. So this is viewed as a natural part of grief and presents a more accepting approach. Individuals can find a balance between sort of facing the loss and re-engaging with life after loss, and shifting between these feelings is common and expected. It's okay to sit in one side for a while, or flip back and forth. You know, it gives individuals that comfort that their feelings and actions and also their behaviours within the grieving process is natural and expected.
So thinking about children and grief, we don't offer children's counselling on the project yet, but our clients are parents, carers, teachers. So you know, we often get asked how we can support children when they are also going through a bereavement. So here's some of the things that we would say. So explaining what has happened using clear language. So when someone's died, tell them about this clearly. Again, referring back to earlier on, where we were saying about using the language, it might feel difficult, but by using direct words such as died or dead, it can avoid confusing children, and trying to make it age appropriate can be difficult because children do have different understandings of death and the permanence of death. But you know, trying to use that language, it helps them understand that. Give them space to ask questions and express what they're feeling. Some children and young people might want to talk about what happens after we die, and it's okay to be curious about what they think and to say that you don't have all the answers. Remind them that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. And with children, their grief can come and go very quickly. They can be up and down, and that can be quite jarring for us as adults, but it is quite a common thing with children. Support them to say goodbye. So include them in events such as the funeral in age-appropriate ways. Ask your child or young person how they would like to be involved, if they would like to attend the funeral. Giving them this option it is really helpful. Me and Katie recently did some training at Cruise, and they highlighted the fact that we as adults do control how children grieve. By not letting them have the choice of whether they go to a funeral or not, there's an element of control. So give them that option. If they don't want to be present for the whole funeral, or they do feel that they're too young for this, they can still contribute by choosing a poem to be read, or a piece of music, or a song to be played. Talk about the person they've lost. It's important that your child or young person knows that they can talk about the person whenever they want to. It can be confusing to feel like the person has become a secret, or that they can't talk about them because it upsets you or somebody else. You can share memories of the person together. A memory book or photo albums are really good ways of doing that. And plan anniversaries together ahead of time and think how you'd like to mark them. Spend quality time together. Small moments of quality time can go a long way in terms of making your child or young person feel loved and cared for. It can also give them a break from the grief, helping them feel safe and relaxed, even if it's just for a little while. And keep to normal routines and continue to do the things that they enjoy. Sticking to routines can be helpful to provide a sense of security and stability to a young person. And I suggest this a lot to adults as well. It's not just children. When you're grieving, a routine really helps. Support them to continue their hobbies, see friends, and do schoolwork. Your child or young person might feel worried, and it's wrong to have a good time, but doing something they enjoy can really lift their moods and give them a break from that grief.
And the firsts after loss. So there are a lot of firsts after a loss, and they're not all experienced within the first year. Some are expected, such as birthdays. It could be birthdays of yours or the person that you've lost, and it wouldn't just be the first birthday, but upcoming birthdays each year. Anniversaries as well. It could be wedding anniversaries, or it could be the day that they've died, the day of the funeral, or even the day of a diagnosis. Mother's Day and Father's Day, they're always upsetting times for some people. And then, as with birthdays and anniversaries, it's not just the first that can be difficult. And you've also got holidays. They could be family holidays that you've had planned, traditions such as Christmas, visits to favourite places, but these can also bring a bit of comfort as well, building new traditions. In regards to sort of like birthdays and anniversaries, not everyone is going to remember your lost loved one's birthday or your anniversary, and this may not be because they don't care, but they may not be as close to that person as you are. But it doesn't mean that they don't know, doesn't mean that they don't care. So it's important that, don't be afraid to reach out and talk about that person or talk about that upcoming first, and prepare yourself as well. It's okay to be upset. Don't compare yourself to others. As we've said previously, there's no time scale with grief, and there's no right or wrong way to feel. But then there are also surprise and future firsts as well. Surprise firsts can be unexpected, such as talking to somebody that you didn't expect to bump into, or talking to somebody that doesn't know that your loved one has passed away. So in these cases, it's quite helpful, to have a bit of a script in place to know what you would say in that situation, or to know that it's okay not to say anything. You can tell them that you'll call them later or send a text or something. Surprise first as well could be hearing a song. It could be a favourite song, or a song that was played at a funeral, or smelling a smell that reminds you of your loved one. One thing that's popped up as well with some of my clients is receiving a card without having that loved one's name on there. And there's also future firsts as well, and these could be sort of social events such as weddings, attending them alone, where usually you'd be as a couple, and births, the worry that the deceased is not going to see that child grow up, and funerals as well. It could be the first time going to a funeral since saying goodbye to your loved one. It could bring back memories of the day. So again, it's important to plan ahead for these and do what's right for you in those circumstances.
So Supporting grief from a workplace perspective. Many organisations have bereavement policies, but if yours doesn't, it might be worth putting one together. They help employees with clarity when going through a difficult time, informs them of who they need to speak to, any bereavement leave that they're entitled to. Although there isn't any law specifying time, being negotiable on that, whether there's a staged return. And I always recommend having a good signposting section. And if anyone needs help with that, me and Katie have got lists and lists of places, including ourselves, that you can signpost to. Communicating with your employee as well, and this may feel difficult. You don't want to say the wrong thing, and understanding that loss is different for everyone, but it might make things more difficult without that communication, or even more painful if one of your employees is worrying about who they need to talk to, what they need to do about work. So if you do make that first call, offer your condolences, ask if they would like someone else to be speaking on their behalf. What support do they need from you? How they would like to keep in touch with you as well. If they would like to be contacting you via email or text rather than phone call at the moment when they know they're going to be upset. Also knowing your own vulnerabilities, that, everyone has gone through a bereavement, and that this might be difficult for you as well to support this person, knowing that you might need support, and knowing that you need to take care of yourself. And I can always recommend as well outsourcing to EAPs, because you have professionals then that are able to support your employees. So bereavement by suicide. This is quite a tough topic. Thinking about what we were talking about earlier with the change in the language of loss, the language of loss, and how it was completed suicide. It is completed suicide now rather than committed suicide. Suicide used to be a crime, and this committed word is contributes to part of a stigma around suicide. So now we use the term completed suicide. Each type of grief can cause intense, complex feelings, but research shows that those bereaved by suicide may have especially complicated feelings and struggles while trying to cope with their loss. Emotions like shame and guilt is a common reaction, and it's remembering that it's not your fault, and neither you or the person that has died are blamed for the loss. Death by suicide is often unexpected, sometimes violent, and it increases the chance of shock and trauma that is experienced by those that are grieving. It can challenge people's fundamental beliefs, and people who are bereaved by suicide may become vulnerable to unexpected, uncontrollable reactions or feelings, you can suffer from complicated grief, especially if you've witnessed the death or found the body of a loved one, or even just imagining what happened to that person. Excuse me. Losing those if you're bereaved by suicide, you may have questions such as, why did they take their life? What could I have done to prevent it? And I think when you are unable to reach a stage where these questions occupy less of your thoughts, your self-esteem, confidence, and hope could be compromised. There's a lot of stigma, and that can be isolating for people as well. And it's rooted in centuries of history, this stigma, the idea that suicide is a weakness or a sin or even a crime to take your life. This continued stigma stops people from accessing help or support when they lose their loved ones to suicide. And this contributes to those feelings of isolation that you're already feeling for grieving for that person. It can cause tensions within families. It can cause family rifts and exclusions of members of family. But this is usually people's own way of coping with their pain. And sometimes there's a lack of privacy around that grief and bereavement. And this can apply to other types of bereavement, such as murder or SIDS, or where emergency services are involved. There may be repeated visits from the police. Media attention might be an issue, the reports or reporters, investigation from a coroner, inquest into the death, and the information around that death as well may be open to the public. And other information that you weren't aware of, or the family weren't aware of, may come out in those ways, which again might be painful. And all these practical concerns when somebody passes makes grief more complicated.
We'd like to share with you some suggestions that we found that clients have found useful when dealing with grief or supporting others with grief as well. So some of the things are listening, listen to that person or be listened to without judgment. Seek peer support. Again, we mentioned earlier that you don't compare your grief with other people, but just by having that conversation with someone that's going through something similar or have been through something similar can give you that support, that comfort that you're not alone in the way that you're feeling. Some of our clients would like to make memory boxes or share photos of the loved ones. And those that, may not want to talk, they find that journaling or letter writing is better, and that can be personal. Those letters can be kept or they can be destroyed. It's up to them what they do with those letters afterwards. There are a lot of apps around at the moment with like mood trackers and things like that, which are quite helpful. And fresh air, just going out for a walk, having things to do in your own time. Don't compare to others, and set aside time to grieve as well. Make sure that you are eating and sleeping and resting, and avoid making big decisions while you are grieving. Some clients, especially in regards to anticipatory grief, they felt that talking about the practicalities of loss with a loved one has helped, especially while preparing for funerals and finances and things like that. And these conversations, they can be, awkward, but the clients have come back and said that they are glad that they've done things in their loved ones' wishes and the way that they wanted them done. There are also, if you are unable to talk to people, there are a lot of organisations that, that are able to help and give support. I'd like to pass on to Tracey now. She's one of our lead counsellors, and she'd like to share her experience on the sad and sudden death of her sister-in-law. So I'll just stop sharing now. Right, so over to you, Tracey.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you see me? I think we've still got Katie a little bit.
I can see you.
Oh, good. Excellent. So I'm Tracey, one of the lead counsellors, and I'd like to share with you my experience of sudden loss. So if I can give you a little bit of background, set the scene. So in 2022, on the 2nd of November, my sister-in-law came to stay. It'd been a little while due to the pandemic that she'd not been able to come. So she came with her husband, and we had this really amazing weekend planned. So we went out for a meal that evening, and it was just a really lovely evening, not thinking anything was going to be, happen. And we all went to bed that evening, and at about an hour after we went to bed, her husband knocked on the door and said that Christine had been taken ill. So I thought straight away, she's got food poisoning, it's all my fault. I took her to this restaurant. And so I said to my partner, you're going to have to go because I can't deal with sickness. And then he came in after about 20 minutes and said, Tracey, it's really serious, and you're going to have to ring the paramedics. So throughout the evening, so we had different roles to play. So I was downstairs waiting for paramedics, and Ray was upstairs with his sister. And so I was a bit oblivious about what really was happening. I wasn't sure what had happened to her. I was just really waiting for some news. And the first thing that I realized was when she was brought down the stairs by the paramedics, and I could see that that she died, that there was just something was seriously wrong. So we went to the hospital, and when we got to the hospital, that's what they said. She was brain dead. There was nothing more that they could do for her. And she hadn't been ill. It was really a shock. But what I found was a couple of things. Is one about the experience that I had and that Ray had. So Ray was very active in Christine's end of life. So he was with her, he was stroking her head, talking to her, whereas I was downstairs with the paramedics, trying to wait for somebody to come and help us. So I was really oblivious about what was really happening, but he was really aware of the situation. So we talked a bit about it, and I was, once we've been told that there was no hope, and we had to call the rest of the family from London to come to say goodbye before they turned off the machine. We talked about the different experience we both had. And following that, the days that followed, I kept returning to my experience of not really knowing and not understanding, but also that wanting to know what happened in that room, what happened in the bedroom. Did she talk? Did she do anything? Was there any movement? Just that constant wanting to know something. Whereas Ray didn't want to really talk about that, because what he was feeling was that he'd lost his sister, and he'd lost those childhood memories, somebody that you could talk about your childhood and about the fun you'd had. So he felt he'd lost that, whereas I felt I'd lost, a friend, a really close friend, somebody who was going to meet my granddaughter the next day. I felt guilt. The fact that that evening we'd been out for a meal, I'd spent the whole evening, it was just me and her chatting about the grandchildren. Whereas if I'd known, I would have wanted Ray to spend the evening with her, that last evening. So I had quite a lot of guilt that, I wish this had happened, or I wish that had happened. And the other thing that I found quite difficult was when people knew that Christine had died. Everybody, I would say 90% of people who talked to me asked how Ray was. Nobody asked me how I was. There's very few people, maybe some of our counselling friends did, because they were aware of disenfranchised grief and how, everybody who's been part of that family circle will have an experience. So I felt that was really difficult at the time. But because I'm aware of disenfranchised grief and also about how to grieve or the things that may come up for me, I knew to ask for support. And also, me and Ray talked, I would say, for hours every day about that evening and about our feelings. And that was the most important thing for me, I think, is just having someone who really understood how I was feeling, but not taking away the fact that, we both had different experiences. Preparing for today, we've gone through it. I talked to Ray about the experience again, and he was saying to me that he's got a greater understanding of how unique grief is and loss, and how just because two people were with somebody when someone died, you're going to have a different experience, and it's okay. And my main tip would be to talk, to not internalize those feelings, but to talk to people. And it can happen in relationships where a child dies and both parents don't talk. neither of them want to talk to one another because one of them wants to move on and maybe change the bedroom, whereas another one wants to, the bedroom wants to be exactly the same. You know, and I think it is about that uniqueness of grief and also that uniqueness of experience. So I hope that's given you a little bit of insight into sudden death and the difficulties that that can bring up, but also touching on a bit of disenfranchised grief. So I'll open up for a few questions if you've got any questions, but equally, in about 5 minutes, we're going to have another slot where you can ask for questions, and that can be to anybody who's presented today. Thank you.
I can't see any questions coming up at the moment. But if I could ask, Tracey, is there a model of grief that you found that you could relate to?
I would say both the Tonkins and the dual process were really helpful. So like Tonkins is, you know, we both talked about our experience of losing Christine and that sadness. And I think it sort of scared us, the fact that our grief might reduce, because we don't want our grief to reduce. We don't want to lose that person. So growing around grief, that your life gets bigger, you do more things, therefore, you know, it still stays there. And the dual process, I think it is, you know, we did move quite a lot between the two, and the loss orientated and the restoration orientated, because, you know, we'd be looking at, you know, the sadness of it all and mourning the loss and, you know, everything we'd lost about it. But then we were doing other things, like, for example, I ended up meeting Christine's grandchildren, which I'd never done before, even though I'd known her 20 odd years. You know, we just never done that. But at the funeral, I met all the grandchildren. So even though that was upsetting, it meant that, you know, there was something still positive that came out of that. So I'm just looking if there's any questions there. What
There
advice
are
would you give
two
someone?
questions there, Tracey.
Yeah.
Sorry, one from Abby and one from Becky.
Yeah.
Can you see both of those?
Yes, so advice for supporting a staff member who does not want to engage in communicating whilst going through grief. I think, again, just giving them the space. So just letting them know that you will be there for them when they're ready. Because sometimes the overwhelming feeling, people don't want to talk because it's just too much. People don't like to show their emotions, I would say, especially in work, because you have to get on with the job. Once when Christine died, I did continue to work, doing my admin work, because it was a distraction and it helped me focus. You know, I think for some people, they need that kind of normality. And then the other one from Becky, what advice would you give for someone trying to support you in the first instance, straight after the loss has occurred? Well, I think it's that real person-centered, isn't it? It's about asking that person what they need from you. As I say, some people don't want anything, other people's want you to, but being aware that whatever loss it is that everyone experiences sadness throughout that loss. And I think for me, it's because people didn't ask me about Christine dying, about what I felt. In fact, my own family always asked me how Ray was, never asked me how I was. But, you know, I am aware that people just don't know what to say sometimes. And Annabelle, do you have any tips for counsellors in helping validating someone's experience of grief that isn't recognised? Again, I think, you know, I think I'm going back to the same thing again. It's about just being there and asking somebody what they need. I would say that would be my top tip, is to say, what do you need from me? And what can I do? I hope that, I hope that's giving you some answers to the questions. I'm sorry if I haven't exactly answered the way you want me to, but if there's anything else, keep continuing sending the questions through, and Jody and Katie can answer them towards the end.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Katie.
No problem. Right, I'm just going to share my screen again. Sorry, bear with me for this. Right. So yeah, thanks Tracey for that. So just to give a bit of information of how we feel that counselling can help when you're going through grief, is that counselling provides a safe place for people to talk about their loss and connect in a non-judgmental and confidential space. It creates that space to talk, where counsellors, they actively listen, they are patient, and they're also comfortable with silence. So if you feel that it is too much and you don't want to talk, that's okay too. Having someone there and someone who could be present and supportive. I know it's quite common with a lot of people and clients that we support. They may have a lot of family around them, but they may feel restricted on what they want to talk about. They don't want to feel like a burden, or they don't want to upset them because of the way that they're feeling. So I always see it as being a bit of a, counselling is like a bit of a blank canvas. Speaking to that stranger just gives you that opportunity to be you and give your true emotions and explain how you're feeling. Counselling also allows people to express their feelings freely, be listened to and understood. And working through your loss with a counsellor can help you process it. So with Platform Wellbeing, we currently have a bereavement project ongoing. We're in the 3rd year, so we've received funding from the Welsh Government where we can offer counselling support that are affected by grief or bereavement. So we can offer an initial assessment, and then following on from that, we can offer up to 6 one-to-one counselling sessions, which are fully funded. Following on from this, we also like to continue our support by offering monthly peer support group sessions as well. At the moment, these take place one Saturday morning a month in our Cardiff office, where we provide refreshments, and it's a nice, relaxed environment. We kind of promote it as a bit of a coffee and catch up because it's very relaxed and it's working really well. With our bereavement project and especially the peer support groups, our main aim is to help clients to gain confidence by connecting with others. You have that opportunity to share your experiences, you give and receive emotional support, or just catch up and create a sense of belonging. We also look to provide support between sessions, so we have created our own self-help guide as well, which contains information on self-help. It's got some models in there, such as the stages of grief. It gives information on some mindfulness and some tips, and also some signposting with online and telephone support. If you'd like any further information on the support that we can provide, by all means get in touch with us. So thank you for listening. So we'll just go back to Mary now for any questions.
Thank you, Katie. One has actually come into chat from Daisy. Can you see that question? Not sure you've got it. What advice do you have for someone who was turned away from a big bereavement service because my grief was too complex, because the person had not actually passed away? It's a very complex case, but is this something you guys could help with?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely give us a call. I know that some of the bigger bereavement services, they don't have the qualified counsellors that work with them, and they go through a little bit less training, so they can more complex cases are a bit more difficult for those volunteers to work with. And I'm not saying all of them, just I am aware of some of the training processes that some of these bigger organisations use, but please feel free to reach out to us, either give our office a call or have a look on the website. We have a bereavement page now, and you can refer yourself via that online.
Just double checking everything else has come through. Right, okay. Just going to share my screen now. So if you three can just keep an eye on the chat for me, because I'll lose sight of that in a moment. That would be great.
We don't currently offer bereavement counselling to children at the minute, but we do have counselling for children. So it's not part of the project, but if you wanted to refer your child through to counselling, you can do that via our website as well.
And the 6 counselling sessions, they can be face-to-face at our Cardiff office, or we do offer online and telephone counselling as well. The initial assessment usually takes place via phone.
Sorry, I'm going to have to whiz through these. I've tried to pick it up where I wanted to, but I can't, so I do apologise.
Anna's question, how we navigate spiritual beliefs. Well, we treat every client as an individual, and during work with clients, we ask people to talk about their spiritual beliefs and where, what they think happens after death. And I think is a really important aspect actually of the counselling. Katie?
Yeah, and I think it is, with counselling, it's being, non-judgmental to anybody's beliefs, and it's, having that comfort and that way of dealing with the grief afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you, Noreen. That Sandy Bear also support children with bereavement. We do, like I said, we've got a load of places that you can signpost you to as well. So please feel free to contact us, and we can signpost you. We don't just work with people in Cardiff, Gabby. We work with people from Newport who are happy to travel to Cardiff, or we can work online or by phone. So waiting times are a bit like this at the minute. Unfortunately, it's not massive, but we are looking at about 8 weeks at the minute. Thank you, Rachel, for putting the link for the bereavement project as well. Just checking there's no other questions.
Very closely approaching midday.
Yeah, the bereavement counselling is free. So the 6 sessions and the monthly sessions are free as well.
So there, we just got some information on the screen. Thank you so much, Tracey, Jody and Katie, for sharing with us today. Tracey, thank you very much for your lived experience. I'm sure it resonated with a lot of people. And again, Jody and Katie, for your help and advice with respect to the process and the fact that everybody's different. There's no right or wrong way. Whatever you feel comfortable with is the right thing for you. And I think that's what I'm going to take away from today. Now, those that have been with us on the journey know that we normally at this stage say what the next webinar is going to be. We've come to the end of our series. So we'd love to hear your feedback. We would also love to hear what you would like us to cover with respect to our webinars moving forward. There are some topics that we've done before that we would love to bring back and will do, probably just a little bit more depth or a different lens to look through it. But if you could spare a couple of minutes just to share your feedback and what you would like to see in the upcoming series of webinars, that would be very, very much appreciated. I've been Mary Rogers. I am the Business Development Manager for Platform Wellbeing. So if you'd like any information, love that picture. If you'd like any information or just want to reach out to give us your thoughts, please do so. It's always very much appreciated. And again, you've got the counselling details, you've got the feedback there. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.